Harry's wife. No nonsense, Anne. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. Princess Anne. She doesn't fuck about, does she? She gets in there, putting some stick about, she calls it how it is, and she gets on with it. She continues to be one of the hardest working royals, going here and there, snipping the tape, opening supermarkets, making speeches, discharging her duties, understanding what it is to get on with being a royal. She doesn't demand a fee for a walkabout. She doesn't think that it's necessary for her to have £1 million for a wardrobe that doesn't fit her properly. She doesn't need the necessity of not adhering to a colour scheme and turning up as Kermit goes to church. She doesn't decide that people need to ask her if she is all right. When there was the attempt to kidnap her, she didn't turn round and turn to a news reporter and go, "Nobody asked me if I was okay." Let's just take a moment to go to that kidnap attempt. It took place way back in 1974. At about 8 p.m. on March the 20th, 1974, an Austin limo was travelling down the Mall in London, headed towards Buckingham Palace, when a white Ford pulled in front of them and stopped, blocking the limo. A man described as having a beard and light red hair. Maybe it's a time-travelling Prince Harry. After all, foxes tell him about what's likely to happen to him, so it could well be that Harry was time-travelling and attempted to kidnap his auntie. The man got out. His name was Ian Ball. Oh, it wasn't Prince Harry. Perhaps he was using a pseudonym. His name was Ian Ball, and he was there to kidnap a princess. Inside the royal car was Princess Anne and her then-husband, Captain Mark Phillips, as well as a lady-in-waiting, Rowena Jane Brassey. The car was driven by Alex Callender, a royal chauffeur. In the front with him was Metropolitan Police Inspector James Beaton, a member of SO14, the Royalty Protection Command. Beaton was the only officer assigned to protect the princess that night. At the time, there was no specific training afforded to royal protection officers, as there was little thought of a threat to members of the family. Even the Queen was routinely assigned only one armed guard at the time when she was executing her official duties. Beaton was, however, armed with a semi-automatic Walter PPK. As Callender drove down the Mall, the driver of the white Ford started behaving strangely. Callender was trying to drive around the vehicle, but to no avail. The Ford then bumped into the Austin and stopped in front of it, blocking its way. Beaton got out of the car, as did Ball, the driver of the Ford. He later told police, "I'd thought about it for years. She, Anne, would have been the easiest. I had seen her riding with her husband." Ball had brought 2 handguns with him. As Beaton walked around the Austin, still thinking this was a traffic altercation, Ball shot him in the shoulder from around 2 meters away. The unemployed Ball had come anticipating violence and was prepared to use his weapons. He told police, "Well, the police, that's their job. They expect to be shot. I took a chance at getting shot, so why shouldn't they?" Ball then approached the Austin, pulling on the door. The princess and her husband held onto the handle tightly. Beaton, wounded, got back into the car, putting his body between Ball and the royal couple. Ball shot a second time, hitting Beaton again, and then shot Beaton point-blank in the chest. The driver, Callender, got out of the car. Ball shot him, and he fell back into the vehicle. Ball then managed to wrestle open the door and grab Princess Anne by the arm. She said he told her, "Please come out, you've got to come," to which she famously replied, "Not bloody likely." And that response sums up Princess Anne with her fortitude and her resilience, no blubbing and having tears about the fact that nobody asked that she was okay. Ball tugged on the princess, and Phillips tugged on her other arm, and the 2 men carried on what the princess went on to describe as a very irritating conversation, according to the Smithsonian, about whether they were or weren't going to go with the assailant. On Talk Show Parkinson in the 1980s, Princess Anne said, "I was scrupulously polite because I thought it would be silly to be rude at that stage." She also said that she did not want to lose her temper for fear that she may hit him and he may shoot her. During the tug-of-war, the seam split on her floor-length gown, about which she later joked, "That was his most dangerous moment. I lost my rag at that moment." By this stage, the commotion had attracted Police Constable Michael Hills, 22 at the time, who had heard popping noises. He approached Ball thinking it was a traffic altercation, and Ball shot him in the stomach. Hill fell back, but was able to radio his station that he'd been shot. As the Princess described, on Parkinson, Hill wandered over and tapped the man on the shoulder and was shot, and then we went back to having this tedious discussion about not going anywhere. A passing driver named Glenmore Martin pulled in front of the Ford, blocking it. He moved to distract Ball, but Boyle pointed his gun at him, so instead turned to offering help to the wounded Constable Hills. Journalist John Bryan McConnell then appeared on the scene, challenged the gunman, and was also shot. Another driver, Ron Russell, was heading home from work. He saw Ball shoot Hills, and he said later to Eastern Daily Press, "I thought, that's a liberty, he needs sorting." A former heavyweight boxer, he joined the fray, and as Ball and Princess Anne were arguing, he walked up and punched Ball in the back of the head. Ball turned and fired at Russell but missed. The distraction gave the Princess the opportunity to reach the door handle behind her, and she somersaulted out the other side of the car. She reasoned that her getting out would force the attacker to move, and she was right. Ball tried to move around the car towards Anne, and she jumped back into the car. Closing both doors, Russell punched again, and this time Ball went down. Regaining his feet, Ball took off across St. James's Park. Peter Edmonds, a detective constable, gave chase and tossed his coat over Ball's head, tackling him and making the arrest. The ordeal was over. The entire event had taken 10 minutes. Inside Ball's vehicle, police found handcuffs, tranquilizers and a ransom note demanding £2 million in £5 notes to be placed in 20 suitcases, and a demand that he be sent on a plane to Switzerland. The note apparently included the words, "Anne will be shot dead." Little is known about Ball and his motivation, but he said at his trial, "I'd like to say that I did it to draw attention to the lack of facilities for treating mental health under the National Health Service." All who were shot that night went on to recover. Queen Elizabeth awarded the George Cross, Britain's highest civilian award for courage, to Inspector Beaton. She presented the George Medal to Hills and Ronald Russell, and Queen's Gallantry Medals to Edmonds and Callender. Glenmore Martin received the Queen's Commendation for brave conduct. According to the BBC, Russell recounted that when the Queen awarded his medal, she said, "The award comes from the Queen, the thank you comes from Anne's mother." Now, of course, recounting all of that is demonstrative of the way that Princess Anne conducts herself. That we don't have all of this frippery and whinging and self-centred behaviour. She gets on with matters. Could you imagine if something like this had happened to Harry's wife? There would be a trilogy film. There would be a 7-book series. There would be interviews. My kidnap hell. My attempted kidnap mayhem. That no doubt going on and on about how the person who was doing it was motivated by being a hater and a racist. We would never hear the end of it. There would be calls for increased security. I told them that my security wasn't good enough. Slams Harry's wife in round condemnation of the withdrawal of security funding, etc. And it demonstrates the difference in fortitude that's exemplified by the normal that is Anne. Her dedication to duty is that she gets on with it, and only yesterday, as reported in the Times, Princess Anne joins royals at funeral of Greece's King Constantine II. European royalty have paid their respects to King Constantine of Greece, who died last week after spending much of his life in exile in the United Kingdom. Aged 82, the cousin of the late Duke of Edinburgh suffered a stroke. His 9-year reign from 1964 coincided with one of the most troubled chapters in modern Greek history. He was forced to flee the country after a 1967 foiled counter-coup against a junta that ruled the country with an iron grip until 1974. That same year, the Greek monarchy was abolished, keeping Constantine in exile, largely in Hampstead Garden suburb, North London, where he was especially close to his second cousin Charles, as well as the late Duke and Queen. Princess Anne attended the funeral in Athens, where Constantine's coffin, bereft of any royal trappings but draped in the country's blue and white flag, lay in state for 2 hours in a side chapel of the capital's main cathedral. His family held a private ceremony for 187 guests after the government refused last week to grant the former monarch the tributes of a state leader. It also refused to pay for the funeral, calling on Constantine's family to do so instead. From daybreak, more than 1,000 security officers and snipers fanned out across Athens, deploying along motorways and rooftops to shield kings, queens, princes and princesses from 11 royal families. Among those present were Spain's former king, Juan Carlos, and his wife Sofia, the sister of Constantine. They sat across the aisle from Spain's reigning monarch, Philippe. Known as King Con or Tino, Constantine was allowed to resettle in Greece as a private citizen in 2013, years after being stripped of his throne, court and 3 palace estates, including Taito and Monrepos, the birthplace of the late Duke of Edinburgh on the island of Corfu. So Anne heads out there. It's reported on alongside the funeral of this former monarch. But notice, we don't have Anne giving an interview about it. We don't have Anne's clothing being dissected in terms of she looks spiffing in black. We don't have her engaging in a solitary tear tumbling from her eye. Why? Because she doesn't do all of that crap. Because she doesn't feel the necessity of whoring herself through the media like a certain somebody does. Naturally, because Anne isn't a narcissist, she doesn't have that subconscious compulsion to assert control. She doesn't need fuel. She's got strong narcissistic traits, if that's no doubt, but she's a no-nonsense normal, getting on with things, and serves as a very useful contrast to the behaviour of Harry's wife. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.